And I think that there are people on the conservative side of things who want to use his death as an opportunity to hit people over the head. So many of the opinions that Mr. Kirk evidently expressed, I would not agree with.
Yeah.
But he did evidently gain a reputation, I don't know if it's actually deserved, of somebody who was trying to actually promote discussion and debate.
Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you. Welcome to the Party Pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 365, and I'm talking to James Lark. He's long been involved with the Libertarian Party. He is a professor at the University of Virginia for many years. I first met you back in at Jacob Hornberger's event back in 1994, Jim, and I know you've been around a long time, and you said you served 10 terms on the Libertarian National Committee over the years. So
that's correct.
Is that the most anybody served, or has anybody done?
I don't know. I would not be surprised if Bill Redpath has a longer tenure than I do. Bill and I joined the LP at roughly the same time, and we met actually in late June of 1986 at an event put together by the Advocates for Self-Government in Bethesda, Maryland. And we've been good friends since then. And I think, Bill is indefatigable in terms of his work for liberty. There's nobody in the Libertarian Party who is more inclined to put his money where his mouth is than Bill Redpath.
Yeah, and of course, also, Bill's also put his schedule book to the where his mouth is too. Yeah, it's so
absolutely.
I know. We probably could look. Probably wouldn't be hard to put all that into a spreadsheet. I mean, 10 terms that's essentially 20 years. I mean, not all consecutive, of course, but definitely.
That's right. I had the honor of being elected as an at-large at the 1998 convention in Washington, D.C. And then I had the honor of being elected as chair at the Anaheim meeting in July 2000. I served my one term. I saw my duty as basically doing the best job I could. I wanted the chair who came after me to be the best chair the LP ever had, because I would have helped to lay the foundation for growth. And then after I served my term, I thought I needed to step off the LNC for a while. And then at the Atlanta convention in 2004, the Libertarian Party of Pennsylvania, Dave John, who was the chair at the time, came forward, and they implored me to seek the position of regional rep. And I was very flattered that they wanted me to serve in this capacity. And I actually, when I served both as an at-large and as the national chair, I thought many of the regional reps, they were serving basically because somebody had to. And I felt that there were certain things a regional rep ought to do. For example, to get out and go among the region, trying to visit the state parties, trying to help them. So I figured, all right, the Libertarian Party of Pennsylvania would like for me to be the regional rep. And I've opened my big mouth as to what I think a regional rep ought to do. So I'll stand for election. And I was very flattered to be elected. And they just kept electing me. And then finally in 2020, because of, frankly, pressures from my faculty chairs, who wanted me to, frankly, get more research done, I decided it was time for me to step aside. And there, Susan Hogarth, who was the chair of the Libertarian Party of North Carolina, had served as the regional alternate during my last term as regional rep. I thought she would do a fine job, so I figured it's now time for me to step back and let other people do the job. And
so you were chair.
I served as the chair during the 2000 to 2002 term.
Okay. So, and Jeff was after that then.
Jeff Neal, who was a good friend of mine, sought the chairmanship, and I thought Jeff would do a fine job. He had been the chair of Texas. He was actually one of my strong supporters when I succumbed to the fit of madness and said I'll stand for chair in 2000. And so I was very happy that he came along and was elected to serve in at the Indianapolis convention in 2002.
Yeah, and of course, the chair has always been an unpaid position. What's the standard workload? How many hours does a chair put in per week?
Well, that's a very good question. Of course, we were in the fortunate position that when I had the honor of serving as chair, we had a very good professional staff, and the gentleman who served as executive director when I was chair was Steve Dosbach, and Ron Krickenberger was on the staff, Bill Winter was on the staff, George Getz was on the staff. So we had very good people who actually did a lot of the day-to-day work. I saw my role, and I saw the LNC's role as basically serving as a force multiplier for the various state parties. Of course, the LNC has principal responsibility for certain aspects of Libertarian Party business, but the main thing was, as I saw it, was to help the various state parties. And I actually gained a nickname while I was national chair. I was called the Road Warrior because I actually made a couple of drives cross country to visit local libertarian groups, state libertarian parties, to first of all thank people for all the great work they were doing, and then to see how can the LNC be more effective in helping you with your state and local efforts.
Okay, so yes, as far as it does make a difference, but I because a lot of people who have been chair, if the LNC chair is an unpaid position, we can't expect people to put in that much time.
Well,
you're just supposed to facilitate the hiring of the staff, it seems.
Right. Well, I had the particular advantage that many of my chair colleagues, so to speak, I had a big advantage because as a university professor, to a much greater extent than people such as Bill Redpath or Jeff Neal or perhaps David Berglund, I was able to set my schedule. Of course, I had to teach my classes, conduct office hours, do research, but I had much more flexibility in terms of my schedule than many of those who have served as chair. So I had a big advantage in that regard.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, if you have that fixed 9 to 5 40-hour work week that you can't go off of, I can see where you're coming from. It's just, I do wonder, Jim, and of course, you were chair during what was probably, I think, one of the most pivotal times for the Libertarian Party. I mean, for me, I think that fateful day had a lot of impact on the LP, and really, I've often said too, it really was, I think, the beginning of the end for America. And I'm talking about the World Trade Center. What was the impact on the LP?
Well, I think you're right. As a matter of fact, the student group at the University of Virginia, to which I have the honor of serving as advisor, Students for Individual Liberty. By the way, we're in our 39th year of consecutive activity here.
That's great.
We brought in, a lot of great people. We've had a lot of great people here. We brought a speaker in on Thursday, September 11th this year, Patrick Eddington of Cato, who gave a very interesting talk, 9/11's Toxic Legacy. And I thought it was important for people to never forget what happened. I view 9/11 as arguably the most consequential day or most consequential event since at least the Cuban Missile Crisis. And you could probably make the argument it goes back actually to Pearl Harbor. It knocked a lot of the strategic planning efforts that we had out of the box. In fact, we'd had a meeting, an LNC meeting in Las Vegas in August of 2001, where we were talking about a strategy. How could we find, in particular, an issue where we libertarians are right, we're actually ahead of the politicians, where we can actually make a big difference and get credit for it. And that was basically working to end drug prohibition. Well, 9/11 occurs and just knocks that right out of the box. The conversation in the United States changed extraordinarily. And we're still, of course, dealing with the aftermath of this. We'll deal with it for a very long time. So I think you're right. It changed things tremendously.
Yeah, and really, I think we probably should correct myself and say not that particular event, but the reaction to the event and the path America choose to take after that. None of this was forced on. I mean, obviously, but I can, there were budget surpluses under Bill Clinton. There were, and we can certainly remember what it was like to fly before then. I mean, and I think, but just looking at the Libertarian Party itself, Jim, it really does seem like maybe that was the golden age of the Libertarian Party. It's I don't think saying that, but but when the LP was peaking at really high membership numbers, and it seemed like things were working well. And I think that I don't know if how do you think that impacted the party generally? I mean, because one thing that seemed to creep in after that was the thing that I did not remember hearing any anti-immigrant rhetoric in the LP before that happened. But after that happened, it was like, well, we got to keep out the bad people, so to speak. And that was really where I think all this started.
Well, you make a very interesting point. I think that, first of all, a lot of wonderful people did great work to help us get our membership up to the peak. Particularly people such as Steve Dosbach, who in his role as national chair and then subsequently as executive director. I think, though, to some extent, the slide started in 2000 with what was, I think, by most standards, a very disappointing presidential vote total with Harry Brown. And I had a good friend in Ohio, Ralph Mullinger, who was from Northwest Ohio.
I remember Ralph.
Mr. Mullinger had great success stopping local government assault on taxpayers' wallets by stopping various bond issues. He would campaign against various wasteful spending as reflected by attempts to, issue bonds and then, of course, pay for those bonds with tax revenue. Ralph contacted me after the 2000 election, sent me a message where he said, look, Jim, I just don't know that this third party thing is working, because we had a very good candidate in Harry Brown, running the second time, and we actually didn't see the sort of results we would like. And I think many libertarians after the 2000 election were beginning to wonder: Are we actually going to make real progress as a political party? And then when 9/11 hits, it showed that there was actually a very interesting split in the party. I think the members of the LNC were surprised, if not actually shocked, at the attitude of some LP members. It was sort of like bomb the Arabs back to the Stone Age. We received a lot of sentiment on the part of LP members. I guess they thought that the LP in arguing against, racial or ethnic bigotry directed toward Muslims, people of Arab descent, that they thought that we were being soft on the perpetrators of 9/11. And so we found out that there were a lot of people who, I don't know if it's fair to say they had anti-immigrant sentiment, but they were certainly much more, if you will, they were much more skeptical about a more open doors policy in terms of immigration than, and I think I was certainly surprised, and many of my LNC colleagues were clearly surprised at the reaction of some parts of the Libertarian Party to 9/11 and the aftermath.
Well, Jim, there's, and it's the same thing with Pearl Harbor. There's always been this large, with Pearl Harbor, there was always this large group of Americans who just, pretended that nothing was happening before Pearl Harbor, and that America was just being this, just sitting here being sweet. And it's like all of these provocations before the World Trade Center didn't matter.
Right.
And I don't know how, and I always thought libertarians were fairly well informed about all this. If you keep kicking the beehive, eventually the bees are going to get pissed off and they're going to sting you. And
right.
Granted, the bees don't have to do that, but you've also got to at least ask yourself, why did I keep kicking this beehive? It's
right. No, you're absolutely right.
Jim, I do, for example, in the early 90s, there were a couple terrorist bombings in Argentina, and they weren't as bad as the World Trade Center. But I looked at those and I said, these truly were unprovoked events, because Argentina hasn't done anything outside of South America with anybody. where there were, various Islamic terrorist groups attacking the Israeli embassy in some Jewish community center. And I thought to myself, yeah, this really is unprovoked, because Argentina has and I guess, and I really don't know if there's any way to argue with those people. It's really, because I've largely come to the conclusion with a lot of people, it seems like it's easier to argue with a smoker about smoking.
Well, there again, people in many cases have their logical priors, and sometimes pointing out to them that maybe those logical priors are not correct. You may have a tough grind in terms of helping them to get a better picture of the world. So you have to have patience, though. You have to try to explain things clearly, and you have to do it with integrity. You have to basically try to be scrupulously fair and honest. And but sometimes people are just not inclined to look at the evidence, because looking at the evidence can be quite painful at times.
Yeah, and of course, I guess the most biggest loss really for us was hospers.
Yes, I mean we've had a lot of great advocates for libertarian values, and we've had a lot of losses that have been very, very serious. A lot of people who are doing great work in their communities to try to explain and promote an uncaricatured view of what libertarians are talking about, liberty and responsibility. And now we've had several people who have passed away who were wonderful ambassadors for our ideas, and they're serious losses.
Yeah, people like Krickenberger. Yeah, it's definitely something I've noticed. Jim, I've largely come to this conclusion that a lot of libertarians have a jump the shark moment, where they either go crazy or they stop being useful, and sometimes it's just a matter of old age. And but it's really unfortunate. I don't know how or why that happens, and that's hospers. And that was a lot of. I just say no, that it didn't split the libertarian movement. Some of them just quit. That's always what I say about it.
Well, I think that there's a selection bias issue that is a very serious problem for the liberty movement. And that is, and I'm a perfect example of this, I hate politics. I did not get involved in politics because I enjoyed it. I don't like the horse race aspect. I became involved in politics because I'm hopelessly bourgeois and a creature of duty. I couldn't ask people of libertarian disposition who were working hard for my liberties. I couldn't ask them to keep working if I'm not willing to help the effort. I have to be out there on the firing line with my fellow libertarians to help us move forward. And I think it is important to have a libertarian party that articulates the good values. But I hate politics. And I think that the vast majority of people of libertarian disposition, and let me make a point. My friend Steve Reed, the late Steve Reed, made the perfectly obvious but incredibly important point that libertarian is an adjective as well as a noun. There are many people who are self-identified libertarians. They've adopted the term, they know what it means, and they are libertarian noun. But there are many more people who are, they don't call themselves libertarians, but their general disposition, their general perspective is one that's quite consonant with libertarian values. Well, people of libertarian disposition, by and large, don't look to politics as a way of dealing with the major problems of the human condition. And so, as a general rule, they don't enjoy politics. They don't get any personal enrichment other than they're doing what they view as their duty.
Mm-hmm.
And so what that means, I think, at least in my observations, it means it doesn't take much to push libertarians, including dedicated libertarians who put an enormous amount of effort. It doesn't take much to push them out of activism. And once you get out of activism in many cases is a hobby. It's something that you do as a matter of habit. Once you get out of that habit, once you stop being so heavily involved in libertarian activities, you realize, oh my God, I didn't realize how many extra hours I have in the day to do things I really enjoy. So I think that the liberty movement has a problem that most libertarians just want to live in peace and harmony with their neighbor. And being involved in politics, it's a grind. It's hard work. And in many cases, you don't see the fruits of your labors. You can be doing wonderful work in explaining and promoting libertarian ideas, but the reward you get is to have people call you nasty names. You invest a lot of time and money. You don't see the fruits of your labor. So I think that it makes it very difficult for libertarians to stay active, because many of them they're interested in being with their families, their enthusiasms, their friends, and it just doesn't take that much to push people out of the activism habit.
Well, Jim, I've certainly seen on a few occasions, but also when I was involved with Toastmasters, once that person is, and usually it's not once they get married, but once that first kid comes, they disappear, and suddenly there's this thing that's occupying all of their time, and that's great. That's great, but Jim, there is also but I would at least hope that such people would at least still be going out and voting for us, and still be giving that maybe $25 or $100 a year to the party. Absolutely. Just to keep things going. And to me, you do need that. And I'm not that fond of Andy Craig, but he's often talked about the member class and the delegate class, and there is kind of a divide there.
You're right.
And the activist people, of course, the people who are active, and people. And I got to admit too, Jim, I would go out and knock on doors for candidates and go to events, but I never made an active effort to be a delegate to national until 2022. And maybe it's because I just had more time. Sometimes life circumstances come up.
Sure. Well, you're right that going off and committing parenthood is it is a life-changing experience. It's not one I've had. I haven't gone out and committed parenthood, but I know many people who were active in the Libertarian Party who, once children came along, their perspective properly changed. They had to invest their time and effort in other ways. But there's so many ways to promote the liberty movement that actually do not have any specific political association. Just being a good libertarian face in your community. When people say, well, that Chris Baker guy, he's a libertarian, and he's a good guy. He's a person of integrity. Just being an exemplar in your community, where people say, well, those libertarians, they're the people who treat me with courtesy and respect. They're the people who are honest. They're not political in the pejorative sense of the term. They actually try to be scrupulously honest and fair. You can be an extremely important member of the libertarian movement just by being a good libertarian in your community.
Well, and Jim, I also, I don't, when people do leave, I often do, I say, I don't begrudge them also if they would, we had one person, who used to be, I think she was on the payroll of LP Texas, but now she works for the Marijuana Policy Project. A lot of people just go, in some ways, the LP does seem to serve as the internship for activism. And then they end up going, say going to work for maybe they go work for Gun Owners of America or some other place too. And the LP is actually how they get connected to all these organizations, because the LP really does touch a lot of different organizations.
Absolutely.
And I don't know if because people do want to go somewhere where they feel like their work is being effective. And
absolutely. And that's one of the things that, again, it's a problem that libertarian activists face. Because you can, for example, you can have two candidates running on the LP ticket. One gets 3%. Well, both of them get 3%. One of them has done an absolutely wonderful job campaigning, has run an excellent campaign, did all the things that you ought to do to try to get the name out. You have two candidates. One did absolutely nothing, and they both end up with 3%. And so it's hard. It's very hard for us in many cases, because we're fighting an ideological revolution as well as one where we actually are trying to make discrete changes in terms of particular legislatures, in terms of particular councils, it's very hard in some cases to measure progress. And your point is absolutely correct. When people can't see that their hard work is making a difference, it makes it easier for them to say, why am I doing this? Maybe there are other things I should be doing. And again, there are many ways to move the ball down the field as a libertarian. One is say creating a business and creating wealth. Just being a good business person who provides value for the effort. That is a way of helping to build the liberty movement, creating more wealth for people. So there are just many things that you can do. Being involved in explicitly political activity, particularly partisan party activity, that's something that, again, for many people, it's just very hard to see, are they really making progress? Where if you go work for issue politics, such as marijuana legalization or right to keep and bear arms, in many cases, it's a lot easier to see progress, to see the results of your work actually bearing fruit.
Certainly, Jim, and Jim, I have to say too, I would consider the entire liberty movement to be a success if we had simply stopped America's decline. If our overall federal deficit was still about $1 trillion, saying, well, we slowed the decline. That's not convincing enough for a lot of people, and I don't. We've seen it really does go to where we are now. And I don't know if electoral politics is the most significant thing. Jim, you have brought up something else too, though, is you get criticism for it. I definitely think the tone overall of our movement has gotten it's really went downhill. I think in the 90s you had disagreements, but most people at least seem to understand that we were all fighting some of the good fights, and we weren't totally just. And I'm afraid, I don't know if it's with smartphones, social media, or both that promoted this, but it's definitely not improved for the. And of course, it's also infected really the overall political discourse period, but we have not figured out how to rise above it. And I don't know if you can comment on that.
In some sense, I think it's actually not surprising that within the libertarian movement generally, and the Libertarian Party in particular, that you're actually going to have more tensions, more disagreements, because as the party grows, you're going to be bringing more and more people in who have different perspectives on certain important issues. So I think to some extent, an increased degree of disagreement, an increased degree of tension about some issues, I think that was inevitable. If we grow, we're going to be if you use the world's smallest political quiz as something of a gauge, the Libertarian Party had a lot of hundreds, so to speak. Well, as you start broadening, as you bring in more people who are perhaps 60, 80s or 70, 50s, who actually start identifying as libertarians, well, pretty much by definition, now you have more disagreements about what does libertarianism mean, what are its implications. So in some sense, growth, we should have known growth was going to bring about problems. In fact, when I sought the LP chairmanship in 2000, Ernie Hancock was present at the debate that I had with the other two contenders. And Ernie asked a very good question. He said, Jim, do you see, well, he asked all of us, but
yes,
I think the question, he may have been directing it to me, was, do you think we're going to see more problems as we grow? And the answer was yes. Growth brings about, particularly in ideologically oriented parties, it's going to bring about more disagreement because you're bringing people in from a broader pool who have, in some cases, very serious disagreements about important issues. So I think to some extent it was an error, but you're right about the sort of the general tone that I think that there has been a much greater degree of coarseness in terms of the nature of the arguments. Of course, I'm reminded of the joke that Henry Kissinger used to tell, and a lot of other people used. He he said the reason academic politics are so vicious is because the stakes are so low. You can, if the Libertarian Party is not in a position of responsibility, our arguments can be nasty, and we don't have a lot of problems because we're not losing power. With Democrats and Republicans, their arguments can be every bit as nasty and mean as you see in the Libertarian Party, but they have to face the possibility that if their arguments get out of hand, if the nastiness gets out of hand, they may lose power. And that serves as something of a restraint on just how nasty their internal battles can be.
Well, this is true, Jim. I mean, disagreement does not have to be ugly. It really doesn't. And for example, I could not have back in the 1990s, I never would have imagined anybody in the Libertarian Party thinking that it was okay to dox Shiloh Hendricks. I could not have seen that happening, but I definitely will see people in the Libertarian Party who think it's okay to go out and, make a totally unknown white trashy woman from Minnesota into a national celebrity because of allegations that there's little or no proof for. And to me, the fact that anybody in the LP thinks that's okay is kind of troubling.
Well, unfortunately, there a lot of people who've come into the Libertarian Party, they bring in some cases they bring a lot of baggage with them, and there has been, I think, a general spiraling downward in terms of the quality of discourse. One of the things I will point out I have tried to do, and I don't know if you know this, but I have the honor of serving as the chair of the board of directors of an organization called the Association of Libertarian Educators. And ALE, what we want to do is to help build support for libertarian ideas in educational institutions. And one of the things we want to do is, as an effort toward this goal, is to raise the quality of discussion, is to say, look, let's have discussions, but let's make sure that they're grounded as much as possible in fact, when people make assertions or allegations, that they try to support them with evidence. I have this notion, which may be somewhat pretentious, that if we get a fair fight, if people evaluate libertarian ideas fairly, that they consider them and compare them to the reasonable alternates, I think that liberty will be the preferential option for a lot of people, perhaps even a majority. But what we have to do is we have to raise the quality of the discussion so that people are comparing apples to apples and not apples to oranges or apples to rocks. Unfortunately, in many cases, it's actually to the advantage of our ideological opponents to keep the quality of debate at a very low level. Because I think many of them realize that if they actually have to fight at a high level, they're much more likely to lose the debate. So again, I'm not terribly surprised that the quality of debate has, first of all, declined, and that it may stay at a very low level for a while, because it's in many cases it's in the best interest of people to keep that debate at the quality of the debate at a very low level.
Yeah, I think it definitely has. It wasn't. That's certainly true. Keeping the debate at a low level, it's certainly something that has happened, and we are more and more. What I find odd is it's getting easier and easier for people to go to the source material, and yet less and less people want to do that. I mean, people are not criticizing their opponents' positions. They're criticizing caricatures of their opponents.
Exactly.
And that's happening on both sides now. And, we've seen this happening, and I can almost predict sometimes, that somebody, these twistifications, that's a word I like to use, the twistification. And I got that from what Jefferson said about John Marshall once. And you don't criticize what they said. You criticize your twistification of what they said.
Right.
And I've also noticed, especially in internet discussion, I think there's often this eagerness to twist these things just so you can say I'm right and you're wrong, whether it be context dropping or other things like that. It's, I remember, just recently before I got on here, I made, Andrew Henderson put out a video about 5 low tax countries. And I made the comment that only 2, and I made the comment on, said, well, only 2 of these countries have direct flights from the USA. And then I get a response that says, well, what about Panama? And I said, well, Panama wasn't in the list. It's you end up with these who don't even, I never, sometimes I will just go and call, and maybe this isn't nice, but I'll just say, are you deaf or are you illiterate? Because you clearly did not read or did not hear or did not listen to what people said,
Right.
And
well,
and the other thing I want to say to people, and this is something else, stop interpreting me and said, read me and listen to me. I don't need you to interpret me.
Well, you're absolutely right. And in fact, as you may know, I've had the honor on many occasions of speaking to libertarian groups, frankly, around the world.
Yeah, you really get out into you're pretty well known among most organizations.
Well, Jim Lark, International Man of Mystery.
Yeah, and I Jim, I really do prefer hanging out with the more intellectual crowds. I mean, and you're a guy who hangs out with both, obviously. Yeah.
Well, thank you. The point I was going to make is that whenever I give lectures to particularly Students for Liberty meetings, there are a couple of points I always make. It doesn't matter what the topic of my address is to be, but there are always a couple of points I always make to libertarian activists, whether political activists or intellectual activists. And that is, we of libertarian disposition, we must live up to the highest standards of intellectual integrity. We have to apply the same withering scrutiny to our own ideas that we apply to the ideas of those with whom we think we disagree. Intellectual sloppiness is no more appealing when it comes from our friends than when we see it among our opponents. We have to set the highest standards of integrity. And I think, by the way, ultimately, that's the way to credibility, is that people are much more likely to take you seriously if they see that you are actually a person of integrity. The second point I always make is just treat people the right way. Treat people with courtesy and respect. And I've always found that if you treat people the right way, if you're a person of integrity and you treat people with courtesy and respect, they'll usually listen to you. Now, they may not agree with you, and it's frankly, sometimes reasonable people will hear libertarian ideas and will have reasonable questions. Perhaps we'll even disagree. But at the very least, if you are a person of integrity, you treat people the right way, they'll usually listen to you. And in many cases, the big victories you win are not because you help someone become the next great exemplar of libertarian ideas, but because you clear away the horrible caricatures that people have about what libertarians believe. And if all you do is by being a good face for liberty, by treating people the right way and getting people to actually see an uncaricatured view of libertarian ideas and the implications, you may have done enormously good work in helping to build the liberty movement.
I hope so, Jim. But I have to admit, when I've been around this movement and I've seen and heard some really good people get attacked so viciously, and it really makes me wonder. And I have to say that I don't know if I've ever, of all the people who know him, I am always amazed at the people who know him, the people who talk about Roger Ver and all of the things he's done for, he was once called Bitcoin Jesus. People would talk about how he would give money to defend people in court cases and fund all these startups. And yet there's this other contingent of people in the crypto scene who just, that's one thing. So if somebody says anything negative about Roger Ver, I stop taking them seriously. I mean, I just said this person is not serious because they're misinformed and don't care that they're misinformed.
Mm-hmm.
And it just amazes me. It's almost as if, to a certain degree, that the more good you do, the more hate you end up getting, and that's a scary thought if there's no reward for it.
Well, there's an old saying you may be familiar with:
no good deed goes
ever goes
unpunished.
unpunished.
Yeah. So, yeah, and some of these charges are true, but Roger, and it's because you end up with this cult where somebody doesn't parrot the things you want them to parrot. I mean, I was talking to a guy a few weeks ago, and I was actually thinking about bringing him on my show, and then he said something about Roger Ver, and I just said, no, he's not coming on. He's an idiot. I mean, and granted, I probably go too fast with something like this where he's smart, he's an idiot. That's not really that. Obviously, somebody doesn't go from being smart to being an idiot that quickly, but it is kind of funny how that happens.
Being informed, well informed, is a full-time job.
It is.
It's hard. It's hard for anybody. Trying to understand what's going on in the world, trying to actually look at the evidence, all the evidence, not just the evidence that suits your preconceptions. That's hard work, and it's most people just have they just don't have time to do the investigations. And there are many issues. For example, if somebody came forward and said, "What do you think about this particular example of government malefaction?" They may be absolutely right. I don't have the time to go in and do the research to see, wait a minute, are these allegations, are they correct? And there has to be a certain sense, I think, of trust among those people who are supposedly on our side of the ideological revolution. Yeah. You have to have some trust that when they come forward and they make suggestions or allegations, that they are actually well-founded. And then, unfortunately, in many cases, you find out that they're simply repeating unverified allegations. They really haven't looked into these things. And it takes real effort to, again, live up to an important high standard of integrity. It takes hard work. And it's just so much easier to be intellectually sloppy. And by the way, my knee jerks violently at all manner of stimuli. I have to make real effort to try to say, okay, you've made this comment about a particular person, or a particular institution, or a particular event. I don't know whether what you're saying is correct. And I try to ground my comments, my advocacy in fact. In other words, things that can actually be verified. Which, by the way, I've actually been accused of perhaps being considerably less effective as an advocate, because I'm not inclined to make all manner of apodictic statements unless I can really back them up. Whereas there are many people, both libertarians and non-libertarians, who don't seem to constrain themselves by trying to get their facts straight.
Jim, I learned this a long time ago, and there is a general reluctance among lots of people to say there are three words that a lot of people don't want to say, and those three words are, I don't know. And they would rather take a shortcut. And I mean, obviously before the days of Google Maps, I can remember the number of times where I would say, well, how do I get to Sam's Pizza Place? And people would rather give you bad directions than just say, I don't know. And that's really, and it ends up really making things worse than, because misinformation, and I don't think we've changed on that. And the problem is, if you're not willing to say, I don't know, you never will know. But the other problem, but then there is the other problem too, is, Jim, people who say, I don't know, do not inspire confidence. The person who goes out and acts like he has, these people who go out and really, if you go out there and think you're the genius on the level of, Einstein, and on the level of Einstein, and act like it and are really arrogant, you attract more followers. You do. than somebody who's actually fairly quiet and humble. It's
there's an old saying.
Yeah.
The eminent moral philosopher and basketball commentator, the late Billy Packer, had this wonderful line. He used it as a matter of self-deprecating humor, but it's a wonderful line. Often wrong, but never in doubt. And there are plenty of people who don't seem they seem to have extraordinary confidence in their own ability, and sometimes it may be justified. But I guess my training as a mathematician, I learned that a lot of things that seem obvious are not only not obvious upon closer inspection, but are actually not true. And so that has helped me develop what I think is an appropriate degree of modesty and humility in terms of the sort of claims I'm willing to make. Again, going back, though, to the point, we of libertarian disposition, we have to be people of surpassing integrity. If I'm going to explain and promote libertarian ideas, I have to be willing to entertain seriously the questions, the comments, the observations where people may say, well, wait a minute, how's this libertarian thing going to work? We have to be people who others, perhaps not, well, in fact, frequently non-libertarians can say, all right, well, that Jim Lark guy, I'm not sure whether he's right, but he strikes me as somebody who at least is going to give me a straight deal. He's not going to try to snow me with bad arguments. He seems genuinely interested in listening to what I had to say. And I think really, if you just treat people the right way, they will usually listen to you. And in so many cases, we can make progress in building support for a society of liberty and responsibility just by treating people the right way, in listening to what they have to say, listening to the legitimate questions they may have, and then trying to answer them honestly.
Yeah, and sometimes, it really is. Sometimes you do end up with things like that. Jim, I do want to get back more specific to the Libertarian Party. When it seems to me as though a lot of this unraveling, I don't want to pick on that. I mean, obviously, different people I think it's a huge factor in things, but you were on the LNC, for example, during all 6 of Nick Sarwark's 6 years there too. Yes. And Nick was elected chair in 2014. And what was your general impression of Nick at the time?
Well, I knew Nick when he was the chair of the Libertarian Party of Maryland, and he was chair at a very young age. You could see this was a young man who, he was a bright, talented young man. He speaks well. By the way, it did not surprise me in the least that he became a litigator after going to law school. He's fast on his feet. He has a rather droll sense of humor, and so you could see there was a lot of talent there. But I also had some concerns about sort of some of the things that he was doing. My opinion of his first term, I think, frankly, he was below par. Part of that was because he'd never served on the LNC before, and there are certain things that you learn by virtue of being on the LNC. And when I became chair, I at least had a term as an at-large that gave me a much better perspective on what the LNC can do and what it can't do. And I think that Nick's second term, he was much better because he had learned a lot from his first term. Just being on the LNC and learning how to deal with a group of people who may have, shall we say, very different ideas about how to move forward. His third term, I think, was rather unfortunate. I think he also had a bit of bad luck in his third term because, of course, COVID hit, and there was the party had this tremendous degree of disagreement about should we have an online convention. There was a very reasonable question about did our bylaws allow for an online convention. So I think to some extent, particularly the end of his third term, he had to deal with an issue that was completely outside of his control. So I think his third term, frankly, was considerably, things did not go as well. But also, from my perspective, one should always look, when one is evaluating the performance of a chair, always remember that chair is part of a team. And you have to evaluate not just the performance of the chair, but you have to understand what were the dynamics within the LNC, because as in my view, the chair was the first among equals. And in evaluating my performance as chair, it's actually what was the performance of the team, the LNC. I was the first among equals, but it was the LNC of which Jim Lark was the chair. It wasn't Jim Lark as chair with the LNC as his backup singers.
Mm. Yeah, I also want to give credit where credit is due. Nick is very articulate. I mean, he's a good speaker. Nick would be very good at, Nick would be good at a podcast. He would be very good at documentaries. He speaks very well, and he's very polished on that sense.
He is.
He's done a lot of those things down pat. He's very
good at that. That was one of his strengths. I mean, that was one of his strengths.
And that helps, And I have to admit too, Jim, a lot of times when I was voting for LNC, I was asking myself things like, is this the kind of person who shows up on time for meetings, or is he always late? And that was as much of a factor as ideology with these people. But, as you pointed, I didn't realize Nick had not been on the LNC, which is kind of interesting.
He had served on the Judicial Committee.
Okay, so
but he had not, and he had served as a state chair in Maryland. So he had some experience.
He had some experience, yes, and I think, I don't know if it makes a difference from going, from a relatively smaller state to a big state, but he learned. But I do want to get into this, Jim, because it seems like to me Nick was starting to at least tolerate and maybe not encourage some of this attacking of caricatures, as we talked about earlier. And when did you see that starting?
Well, I thought in the aftermath of what is usually referred to as Charlottesville.
Yes, Charlottesville. Yeah. You were. Yeah. Let's talk. Since you're in Charlottesville, what exactly happened in Charlottesville? I mean,
that's a story that would take much longer than we have. The boiling it down, you had a situation where people who were associated with the right.
Yes.
The sort of the Trump right came to Charlottesville. The proximate reason was because there was an effort by Charlottesville City Council to remove statues that were statues basically of Confederate monuments. And there was an effort in August of 2017 to basically have these rallies, these protests. Frankly, the disturbances that took place in Charlottesville, in my opinion, were a direct result of police incompetence and malfeasance. That basically the police allowed these, instead of performing a cordon to keep these people apart so that there wouldn't be violence, there was an utter police failure, in my opinion. Anyway, in the aftermath of this, Nick made some comments about people associated with the Mises Institute that I thought, frankly, were unfair. I thought that some of these comments were improper, and I mentioned this to him when we had an LNC meeting. I don't believe it's a good idea. It looked to me like Nick was almost trying to pick a fight. Maybe that's not fair. Maybe that wasn't what he was trying to do. But it struck me that he was engaging in some activities that he just didn't need to do, and they reflected his personal interests, his personal biases. I didn't think it was something that helped the Libertarian Party. But then again, he was chair. He could do what he wanted to do in this case. But it wasn't. I just didn't think it was the right way of going about things. I always try if somebody makes a comment that I'm not sure about, I always try to first of all find out, what did you mean by this? It sounds that you were trying to say this. Is that really what you meant? Again, it's an issue of trying to be fair. And it struck me, and again, maybe I don't know all the details, but it struck me that Nick was not particularly fair to people who had made comments. It struck me that he was making some assumptions that I didn't think were justified. So I think that was unfortunate. And again, the liberty movement is still at a point where we don't need to antagonize people who are basically on the same side. We don't need to antagonize them needlessly. So I didn't think that was the right way of going about things. But again, I should note, maybe there were other communications to which I was not privy maybe he was responding to something that I didn't see. So again, it's possible that that I don't have a complete understanding, but at least what I saw, I didn't think that I didn't think it was the best course of action on his part.
Yes, it is quite interesting, Jim. This, it's, Wikipedia refers to it as the Unite the Right rally, and this was on 11 and 12 August in 2017. Right. So, but I'm really trying to figure out how all this got started. Who's responsible for what, and just how we got to this point. Now, it's interesting to note that the first appearance of Michael Heiss on the Tom Woods Show was the 27th of September, which was a month and a half after that. And I don't know if that's necessarily an accident, because it seems like to me, can you name who specifically did Nick? You mentioned the Mises too, but
yeah, I think it was
after people.
I think it was
going after people by name.
I think the gentleman's name was Jeffrey Deist, and Mr. Deist evidently made a comment, something about that many Americans, they have a perspective on patriotism, a love of country, and I think Mr. Deist used a reference to blood and soil. Yes, which I thought he was basically trying to, sort of an ironic comment. It was meant actually to be somewhat sardonic, and evidently Nick took it in a different direction. And maybe Jeff Deist meant something that maybe the way he meant it was not the way I interpreted it.
Well, yeah, and this is one of those things that it's like I can't use these words. It's and so I'm like, so what, and one person who also not really affiliated with the Libertarian Party was that Steve Horwitz guy. He really jumped on that too, and it's I don't know. You hear people use certain words, and I look back and say, well, and it's basically this logic. Well, the Nazis drank water, and I drank water. Does that make me a Nazi? I mean, this is the kind of convoluted thinking you get from these people.
Well, I can understand again. And by the way, I knew Professor Horwitz, and we were not close friends, but I knew him. We had spoken at a lot of events together, Students for Liberty events, and I understand that sometimes people will make comments that cause other people's knees to jerk. That's happened to me. What I always try to do is, again, it's important for me to be fair to other people, and I know I've been in situations where I made comments that that I meant as a matter of ironic humor, and the other person took it completely the wrong direction. And when I found out about it, I tried to say, look, I'm sorry if I said something that, that's not what I meant. My apologies for being inarticulate. Sometimes reasonable people will hear the same comments, and they will come to they'll have completely different interpretations of what is said. And so I think it's important for us, particularly if we're in positions of leadership, that we bend over backwards to try to be sure we don't ascribe bad motives unless the evidence is very strong that those bad motives exist. And so I try to bend over backwards to be fair. If somebody says something that I regard as bad, I try to make sure that I first of all understood what it is that they said, and I usually will try, if possible, to let them say, wait a minute, did you mean this? Did I understand you correctly? Because I don't like, if nothing else, I don't like arguing about bad caricatures. I don't like to argue over things that somebody didn't mean what it appeared that what they appeared to say.
Jim, that's something that you can get, and that is something you can get in trouble too. Sometimes you have to look at how people use words, and people can use words just into it's just the same way that the Mayans and the Hindus both developed zero independently. I remember some people got mad at me because I was at 2022, and I said, well, I made the comment that Whitney was playing sick, and what I meant was that she's playing while sick, not that she's pretending to be sick, but she's playing sick in the sense of Michael Jordan played a game with the flu.
Sure.
That I guess I should have said she's working sick, but because when Whitney chaired the convention, she had that ear infection, and probably shouldn't have even traveled at all from what it sounds like, but she cared enough that she went and made the effort. So and I said I wasn't saying she was acting like she was sick. I was saying she was, and granted, but you do have to ask people for nuance on those things, and some people will just run with these comments and just. And I should want to point out too, Jeff Deist gave that talk apparently this was an event on July 28th at the 2007 Mises University, and so that all came to a head. But yeah, so he attacked Deist. And I know he was also people really started going after Woods too, though.
Right, and again, Tom Woods had built up, from what I understand, he'd built up quite a listenership. I had actually the only association I'd ever had with Dr. Woods was he and I both gave addresses at the 2016. Party Congress of Liberalistene, which was the Norwegian Libertarian Party. I was actually in Oslo, and Tom Woods gave a presentation via some sort of, it might have been Skype or something like that. Yeah. So that was really the only association I had with Tom Woods as of 2017.
Yeah.
And so I ultimately, if you are in a position of responsibility, in particular, if you're sitting as the chair of the Libertarian National Committee, I think you have to be very, very careful that if you're going to criticize people of particularly other people in positions of responsibility in the libertarian movement, just try to be sure you understand what they said. Try to give them an opportunity to explain if you're wondering about what they actually meant. And again, to me, it's just a matter of fairness. I wouldn't want people to treat me well. As I said, I've had situations where I made comments that I thought were, I thought it was quite clear what I was trying to say, and I couldn't imagine that someone would take offense. And yet people did take offense, and so you just have to realize sometimes people, what you say may not be what people heard. So just slow down, make sure that to the extent you can, make sure that you actually do understand what people are saying. Again, just try to be fair.
Well, and to his credit, Tom Woods is a workhorse. I mean, I think he's got 20 books, and the book that I think really, got him a lot of attention was the book Meltdown. Mm-hmm. In 2009, a free market look at why the stock market collapsed, the economy tanked, and government bailouts will make things worse. And this really, that was a very pivotal time. That was when Ron Paul was getting a lot of attention. So I think that was when Woods got invited onto a lot of talk shows, and even was getting, and libertarians Woods was getting a lot of attention from conservatives and stuff like that. And so he'd built up this podcast, but I only bring up Tom because I don't think if there's no Tom Woods show, I don't think the Arena Reset happens.
No, that very well may be. That very well may be. I think that from what I could tell, there were legitimate questions about the extent to which the Libertarian National Committee and the Libertarian Party more generally, could we have been more forceful in terms of going after efforts to basically restrict the liberties of America because of COVID. I think there are legitimate questions about could we have been more forceful in asserting, basic libertarian ideas.
I do want to get to that, but I want to stay back in 2017 and work our way to that, because that seems to be where this seems to be where a lot of this stuff happened. Because I don't know, but Molman often talks to me about, he got a call one time from Nick and said, "Oh, I attacked Tom Woods today." So it seemed like it's almost like maybe Nick was trying to engage in some kind of virtue signaling. And because that's what so much of this is there's so much of this in politics where I'm just trying to show that that I'm a good guy by making these gestures. And I want to say too, there's also in the liberty movement what I call rebel signaling. Hey, I want to show everybody how rebellious I am, so I'll show up at a black tie event, in looking like a homeless person or something like that. It's there's a lot of things that go on to Jim. Also, I don't know if this played a factor too, but we had something happen at the 2016 convention that a lot of people talk about, and I think I'll let you know what you talk about in the chat here. But this event also. That I wonder how you think that helped or hurt the perception of the LP.
Are you talking about the appearance of the chair candidate, Mr. Weeks?
Yes.
Yes. Well, that was interesting. That was interesting.
Yeah.
I know because of course I actually Nick Sarwark had asked me because he was being nominated for the chair position and that Arvin Vohra was going to be one of his nominators. Neither of them could chair the convention. And so Nick asked me if I would be willing to help out. And I said, certainly. So we had this big surprise. Mr. Weeks was the first person on the list. I mean, we basically randomized who would be the first person to speak. It was Mr. Weeks. I introduced him, said, you basically have your 10 minutes. And then I discreetly excused myself from the stage because, frankly, my kidneys were about to burst. And so I excused myself to go to the gentleman's room. As I finished reasonably quickly, started heading back into the main hall, and there was this stream of people leaving the main hall. And someone, and I apologize, I'm getting senile. Someone I recognized, but I can't think of the gentleman's name. He called out to me, said, "Jim, you got to put a stop to this. That's disgusting." And I had no idea to what he was referring. And then I opened the door and saw exactly to what he was referring. So I, shall we say, I quickened my pace, and I entered the stage right while Mr. Weeks was exiting stage left, and I noticed that he evidently, to help his dance stylings, he evidently was using his mobile phone for the music. Well, he left his mobile phone on the on the platform, and so I picked it up rather delicately and said, would you get this to Mr. Weeks? And a friend of mine who was watching on C-SPAN said I looked like I was a member of a bomb disposal unit picking up this mobile phone. That set off a lot of people were very upset that Gary Johnson and Bill Weld had been nominated to serve as our presidential and vice presidential candidates, respectively. People had not had lunch; they were getting a bit cranky, and so this set off, shall we say, a lot of people were not happy, and I had to be up there trying to get things back into some sort of civilized, ordered fashion. It was not the most pleasant moment. I will say that many people were, graciously said, "Jim, you behaved yourself well. You acquitted yourself well." But it was not a pleasant moment. And to your point, to the point I think you're trying to make, there are still people who watched the convention, saw Mr. Weeks, and frankly, it gave them what they consider to be good evidence that the Libertarian Party is not serious. And so that, it was most unfortunate. It still comes up. There are still people who ask about that, and that's
certainly
that's life. We have to deal with it and then drive on.
I can't criticize Gary Johnson all that much, but I do think Weld was pretty much a disaster, but only because of the things he said. But it was still. I'm not going to argue with success, but I just bring up Woods because Woods. It seems like this was when Woods was taking an interest in the LP. It's also interesting too. I'm finding you can look. You can go back and look this stuff up. Karen Ann Harlos was on his show on the 9th of February, 2017. And this was before Karen Ann was even really nationally known in the LP. I don't know how these people came across his radar, but it seems like this was when Tom started taking an interest in the LP, and Heiss was on Michael Heiss was on multiple times, but also, I can also find an appearance where several appearances where Joshua Smith was on. Joshua Smith was on the 9th of May. So this was when Tom started to promote Joshua Smith to be chair of the LNC. What was your he was on the LNC a few times. What was your experience with Joshua Smith on the LNC?
Well, I met Mr. Smith, I think, for the first time at the Libertarian Party of North Carolina convention in 2018. I'd barely heard of the gentleman. We were both there. I had the honor of addressing the Libertarian Party of North Carolina convention. Of course, I was the regional rep for North Carolina, and he seemed like a nice enough fellow. I had real questions about his desire to serve as chair, having never been on the LNC. I place a
just
very
like Nick.
I mean, just the same concern I had, frankly, about Nick Sarwark becoming chair, having no experience on the LNC. I had the same questions about Mr. Smith seeking the chairmanship without actually having served on the LNC. In fact, as far as I knew, he didn't really have any major experience in an executive capacity with any of the state parties. And so again, he seemed like a nice enough fellow. We chatted very pleasantly, but I did not. I have a pretty substantial bias against people who don't have any experience on the LNC suddenly becoming chair or vice chair. I think it's a good idea for people who want to be on the LNC, who want to be an officer, particularly chair or vice chair, that they actually spend some time on the LNC and get the lay of the land before they seek an executive position such as that.
Yeah, it makes sense. Well, 2018 is somewhat critical here because, another thing I want you to comment on is, again, this was after, Heiss made his first appearance on the Tom Woods show in 2017. And then, around then the same time, the pot starts getting stirred and Michael Heiss basically comes out and says, oh, the LP National could have had Ron Paul and Judge Napolitano speak there and somebody was going to pay for them, but the Libertarian Party didn't want them. And I know there are a lot of logistical considerations involved here as to why Ron and, why a speaker shows up or doesn't show up. But this is this new game though. You didn't want my speaker, so that means you're not fit to lead this party is what this whole
and I heard suggestions about that. And again, if you're going to make assertions that those organizing the 2018 convention didn't want Ron Paul to appear, again, all right, show us the evidence. It's just not appropriate to make these allegations unless you have at least some decent evidence to back it up. And I tend to dismiss people who shoot from the hip. Again, I may be a little slow and somewhat methodical in my efforts, but I think that sort of approach. Okay, show me the evidence. I think that's it's kept me from making lots of mistakes, and so
there are a lot of details to things like this too. And one thing I've heard, for example, is that they didn't want to give Ron Paul a speaking slot. But Ron Paul had often been at the LP National in the past, so it wasn't an issue. But this is suddenly something they made into an issue, and somebody's going to pay for them. And of course, and the sad truth is, 90% of the people in the Mises Caucus lick this up without even asking any questions, and that's sad but true. I've noticed though that often these little things like "you didn't want me" or something like that, it just reminds me, of. Back in '96, a guy who's a good author wrote this book or edited this book, and Liberty Magazine attacked it. And he once said to me, "Well, Liberty Magazine doesn't like me." And he said, "Well, they wouldn't publish my response to a criticism on my book." And then we found out that he actually wanted paid for it. It's like, well, yeah, they were going to. So when you look into the details of why these things happen and don't happen, there's often a lot more complexity and just portraying it. And Jim, sad but true, somebody else has done the same thing with saying, I wanted to bring Milei to Libertarian LP Florida in maybe 2022, and LP Florida didn't want him. And it's like, this person does not have, I've checked this out. This person, I don't think ever had any direct line to Javier Milei. But this is now offered as evidence that the people leading the party are not fit to lead. And that seemed to stir the pot too. And
well, and you have to ask the question, when people are making assertions, just ask them where, why are you making this assertion?
Why are you making this assertion?
And ultimately, if people are not willing to, if they're not willing to tell people, look, you're making these assertions, you're making these allegations, show us the evidence. If people are not willing to do essentially a form of due diligence, there's, what can I say? It's if you're not willing to take responsibility for trying to understand what the background is, to try to figure out, is this fair? Mm-hmm. There's just not much you can do if people are not willing to be people of integrity. What can you say?
Yeah, that's true. I don't know, but this seems, I was actually planning to go to LP 2018 because it was in New Orleans. It wouldn't have been that far, but then Mother died 2 or 3 days before that convention, so I didn't. And believe it or not, I had still never been to LP National at the time. So, then things keep just going on. But it seems like the Mises Caucus was starting to acquire some momentum and gain more membership, and then we then work our way up to. And the people who were opposed, and most of the people who opposed the Mises Caucus were just saying, "Oh, they're a bunch of this and that," and then although they went out and recruited Hornberger, which was I don't know if you have anything to say about that or not. If you have a comment on Hornberger getting involved with the LP again, because you being from Virginia and you knowing Jacob, you certainly.
Well, let's just say that Jacob Hornberger has done a lot of good things for the Liberty movement, and he's a good speaker, and he was very, very good concerning his help to my student group, Students for Individual Liberty at UVA. But he and I have had, let's just say that we've had some interesting disagreements, and I don't hold him in particularly high regard these days. I could go off and bend your ear, but I won't do that. Jacob Hornberger is, in my opinion, by and large, a good speaker. He is capable. He's given some absolutely superb speeches. He has done some very good work for the Liberty movement. I guess the caucus felt that he would be the Mises Caucus felt he would be a good presidential candidate. And they evidently were able to recruit him. He had not been active in the LPVA for many years, and so all of a sudden he gets involved again. And there were many of us who felt that he would command a substantial number of delegates at the national convention because, again, his reputation as being a good speaker, of articulating good libertarian values, he was going to attract a lot of support. But I think many people who had been around the party for a while also knew about about some of his less good activities, and I suspected that he would not be nominated. That there, with someone such as Joe Jorgensen around. Dr. Jorgensen, I thought, would be a better presidential candidate, and I suspected that she would ultimately be the nominee, and of course she was. Now, I should point out, by the way, I've known Joe for many, many years. I brought her to speak at the University of Virginia in 1996 in her capacity as our vice presidential candidate. I consider her a friend, and so I had a rooting interest in favor of Dr. Jorgensen. But
Well, Joe's an interesting case too, because Joe ran for vice president and then kind of disappears and then suddenly reappears again, and she did in 2020. But it does make me wonder, because sometimes it seems like the Libertarian Party does not bring out the best qualities in these people, and yeah, Jacob's done a lot of good work. He's been on the show, so I don't want to. And that's important, and the thing is, how do we get more good work for these people? But the Mises Caucus picked him as, and I don't know, maybe that was the best person, and they were going to run Joshua Smith in 2020 again for chair. And so then of course, as we go on the LNC, and this is where, and I did finally want to get it to, this is when February of, in January, Trump starts promoting the coronavirus because he wants to demonize China and, make China look bad. In last week of January, he shuts down, says, "Oh, no more flights in and out of China." And I think part of the reason why these people started, and people like Curtis Yarvin were promoting the coronavirus too. Yes, it's the end of globalism, they were saying. This was the whole agenda. They wanted to demonize international travel, demonize international trade, and basically, go completely isolationist. So this was their justification for promoting this coronavirus and scaremongering about it. But then suddenly they scaremongered enough that, Americans, being creatures of hysteria, well, then again, that's not just Americans, start acting like hysterical idiots. And, so I can know the person, the social media profile of a person who started a petition to get South by Southwest canceled in Austin at change.org. And so suddenly coronavirus bad becomes this mass movement. And then the left picks it up. And then we go into, shut down everything. What can you tell me when the LNC was having conversations about this, Jim? Because, this was the golden opportunity for the Libertarian Party. And the Libertarian Party completely blew it.
Well, I have a somewhat different perspective, in the sense that I think that when you have a situation where you have a communicable disease, you have a situation where we really didn't understand a lot of aspects of that disease. I think that people were put in a position where, yes, individuals should have great liberty in terms of their ability to move throughout society. On the other hand, if you have situations where you have highly communicable diseases, I can understand that there were many people of libertarian disposition who were not sure exactly what the balance should be. I think that to the point about perhaps the Libertarian Party and the LNC in particular was not sufficiently forceful about laying the ground rules. So in other words, what should be sort of the default values? I think that that's probably true. I think we were a little slow on that, because I think also, if you looked at the people on the LNC, I think everybody did want to, they wanted to get their facts straight before they came out. And if we're going to criticize government policy, let's make sure that we know what we're talking about. And so I think we were a little slow. I guess maybe I'm willing to give people a little more of the benefit of the doubt.
Well, it's the fact, of initiating violence against non-violent people.
Yes. And that's right. That point had to be articulated, and I think one can make a reasonable argument that we were not sufficiently forceful in terms of doing that. And many of those people who evidently became part of the Mises Caucus, that was one of their criticisms. And again, there was a lot of justification for that criticism.
Well, and Jim, I quote this a lot, and quote this is H.L. Mencken quote: "The whole aim of practical politics is to keep the populace alarmed, parenthesis, and hence clamorous to be led to safety, parenthesis, by menacing it with an endless series of hobgoblins, all of them imaginary." End of quotation.
Well,
that was exactly that. I look at a lot of politics through that lens.
Yes.
What they're scaremongering about something, what does it serve? I mean, they want to make us afraid. Why do they want to make us afraid? And
well, you can make the argument that the principal stock in trade of politicians is they get you to put blinders on. They tell you what the problem is, and then they articulate what they believe the solution is. And an important part of what we as advocates of liberty, we need to do is to help people to the point where they don't put the blinders on in the first place, that they are actually in a position to think for themselves. They're actually in a position to acquire the appropriate knowledge, so that when a politician comes forward and offers this argument, well, we have this major problem. Well, first of all, is it really a major problem, and how do we address it? So, but that ultimately it imposes a degree of responsibility on the citizens to be willing to ask questions. And unfortunately, and by the way, don't get me started on the issue of education in the United States. As a university professor, I think that the educational system has in many ways failed the United States. Again, not terribly surprisingly, given the degree of government involvement in education. So I think that ultimately the citizens have to be willing to ask questions and to question the various assertions of politicians who, quite frankly, as you quite correctly point out, many politicians have ulterior motives in the positions that they're suggesting. And so there should be a general skepticism when politicians are suggesting, we're going to do this for your good. A general skepticism, I think, is very healthy on the part of the people.
I do think that it was there was very much what I would call a paralysis, but we did have some people who were standing. Jeff Tucker was certainly a hero in all this. He was one of people in more of what I would also call the anarchist crowd, like Anarcho-Polko and stuff like that. They were also saying this is a scam from day one. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Jim, I do remember also, going into this, I know Nick Sarwark was very close to the medical doctor who lives in Washington. I think you know who I'm talking about there. And I know he was, this is really what caused him to leave the Libertarian Party was, he was saying the Libertarian Party was promoting death and all this stuff by not, just because he said, totalitarian measures are okay to fight this.
Are you talking about Kyle Varner?
Yeah, I didn't want to mention his name, but yes.
Well, Dr. Varner, I didn't know him well. He was actually on the board of directors of Liberty International.
Yeah, he was why I started going to that conference. I considered him a friend back then.
And I frankly didn't agree with his perspective. And it was, that was something that was of great importance to him. Sometimes people that you like and respect they'll embrace ideas that you just disagree with. And so he basically, from what I can tell, he sort of divorced himself from the general libertarian movement. And I haven't seen. Or I haven't had the opportunity to interact with him since he basically left the board of directors of Liberty International.
Yeah, and it was really, and it was, and it really was the Lew Rockwell crowd, the Mises Institute, who was calling all of this out. Ron Paul was calling it out, and there were other people who were silent. I think I can understand why you might have a little bit of paralysis about this, because when you get attacked in a way that you're completely not expecting, this was not an attack that I think the Liberty Movement was mentally prepared for the World Trade Center, but they were not prepared for this.
Well, I think also, consider I'm not a medical doctor. I don't play one on TV. And when you're dealing with problems involving issues I don't know a heck of a lot about, I will say, yes, I'm going to be conservative. I'm not going to open my big yap to make statements about what should or should not be matters of public health policy. If I'm not in a position to, I don't really know the evidence all that well. Yeah. Again, we needed to assert good basic libertarian values. But I think that part of the reluctance, on at least certainly on my part, and I think on the part of many LNC members, was in many cases we just didn't know the facts. Although it's not clear that anybody really knew the facts at least early on. By the time the 2000 LP, the first part of the 2000 convention, I think that many of us regarded ourselves, frankly, as rather ignorant about a lot of the facts involving COVID and its spread. So
I think the LNC did the best they possibly could have done regarding the convention, considering its circumstances. But I guess the fact that these policies were inherently violent for some people just didn't matter. Violence is okay, which, so, but anyway.
Well, it certainly was something that, again, it was a major step backwards for liberty in the United States, and we're still, of course, dealing with some of the the aftermath of that. And we've in the last 25 years, what with 9/11 and then what with COVID, we've seen two major shocks to the system that have made it much more difficult for libertarians to gain frankly, to gain support among the American people.
I can say, at least regarding coronavirus, I did also encounter some people that pleasantly surprised me. People that may not have been, just in my own personal life. I mean, people I knew and I really bonded with some of them. It just people of various stripes, but I can also say that I probably more likely, and I think some of the older libertarians were more likely took the black pill in September 2001 as opposed to March 2020.
Okay,
because that was just realizing, because as soon as the coronavirus stuff started, I was also saying that no reconciliation is possible or desirable.
Okay.
I mean, I was just thinking, I have no desire to live in a society with people who think this is okay.
Well, it certainly, again, it was a shock to the system, and we're still having to deal with problems that emerged. And there are plenty of people, politicians who, what was the phrase? Never let a good crisis
go to waste. I was wrong. What was said at some of the LNC meetings, Jim? I mean, what was going on in early 2020? I mean, about how do we respond to this? What are we saying here?
Well, actually, I think that there was just a general sentiment among, at least, certainly, again, in my case, because I'm not a practitioner of the medical arts. I didn't know a lot.
Do you have to be a doctor to understand violence? I don't.
No,
I don't. I'm really confused here, Jim. I know you're not a medical doctor. I'm not a medical doctor either, by any means.
But I think that there was a question about exactly how do you deal with something where you have a communicable disease where people are walking in public. How do you best deal with that, where you don't want to see the disease widely spread? You also don't want to give government the power to intervene in the lives of people. So I there was a lot that I just wasn't sure about in terms of what would be the best response.
I mean, there was a lot of people say, at least, there was that video they did about, FDA suppressing testing mechanisms, which I certainly,
well, that's not surprising. I mean, if you understand
that video, and it was interesting, but outside of that, I didn't really see a whole lot,
Well, there's always been I think the issue of the FDA and its police powers over what you put in your body for your health, safety, and comfort. That's a much, in many ways, that's a much easier target than some of the other issues that we had to deal with. The FDA should have no police powers with respect to your using what you feel is appropriate for your health, safety, and comfort. That's in my opinion, that's a very straightforward issue. So I don't think there was any issue. But actually, getting back to your question, I think there was just a general degree of, we're just not sure what's the best way to respond to this, given the concerns that many Americans had about this highly communicable disease. So I do agree, by the way, that people can reasonably say the LNC was a little slow to respond, and I certainly plead guilty to not being particularly fast and on the trigger with respect to that response.
Well, it also depends on who they're listening to. I didn't think Joe talked a lot about it on the campaign trail though either, and neither did Spike. I listened to both of them for about 1 hour, and they talked about it for maybe 5 minutes, and it's just like, why aren't you talking about this?
Well, again, maybe they just didn't feel comfortable dealing with this, given the sort of audiences they were facing. I don't know. I wasn't on the campaign trail with them. And so
it just seemed, but there were people out there I think were looking, and there are people who are still scratching their heads about this. And I know.
No, I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right about that.
It's I think one reason why I've gotten so interested in Milei is just because this was kind of where Milei got more vocal, and the liberty movements. It does look like to me that, Jim, we did see somewhat of the result was this because, Donald Rainwater did very well in Indiana because of this. Now, Indiana is a great state affiliate. They do really well, but this was a governor getting double digits in the election. And I think it was largely because of this, because their red governor being red, just like Greg Abbott, just like all these other ones, bought into this nonsense and, we'll destroy the economy over nothing. I think it raises a lot of serious questions.
Yes, it does. It certainly does.
It raises a lot of serious questions for me about the whole nature of what we call humanity, Jim. It's.
Oh yeah, no, you're.
Are we rational creatures, or are we just slavish, servile, and completely stupid? It's a good question. It's.
Yes.
It does not say anything good about we don't have an education. No country has an education system. It has a school system, and there is a big difference, because school is just about teaching servility.
Well, don't get me started on the educational issues, because that's a hobby horse that
it's a new one. Yeah, I do admit that, but it seems like to me this, Jim, for me, this was. We had an event in October of 2020, and LP Travis was going to be there, and then they suddenly, we're going to pull out of it. And this was an event protesting and stuff, and that was the day I said, well, I have to vote for Angela McArdle now, because she was.
By the way, I don't know to what event you're referring to. This is something about which
this was an event in Austin called the Constitutional Rights Summit. There were lots of people with various different political persuasions there. Most of the people were not wearing masks. They were just out there acting like normal human beings, and at least what we think are normal human beings, and at least what was normal in 2019. And the chair decided he didn't want to be involved in that movement. I guess he saw one Trump hat and got scared. This was it's completely mind-boggling how so many of. I went out to a protest in April of 2020, and I saw, these things were becoming Trump rallies. It was truly amazing to me. I don't know. You're supporting the man who promoted all of this and is responsible for all of this. Largely, I don't know. With the.
Well, you've raised a lot of extremely important points. I think the question is, how do we go forward? How do we deal with these problems so that we actually move us in the direction of a society of liberty and responsibility? What should we be doing now?
It's it's really more and more made the case, I think, just for separatism. It's because when did people start making noise on the LNC about? It seems like Karen Ann Harlos was the first person who started making noise about it. Of course, you were off the LNC after 2020, but she was.
That's right. As of essentially the end of May, early June, I had already resigned my position, and Susan Hogarth, who had been again the regional alternate, she was elected to take the position of regional rep. And I should note it was on a personal level, just so your listeners understand. I was under a great deal of pressure. I have 2 appointments at the University of Virginia, one in the department of, it's now Systems and Information Engineering. At the time, it was called Engineering. It had a different name. We'd suffered a shotgun marriage between systems engineering and civil engineering, and then I was also in the what ultimately became the Center for Applied Mathematics, and both of my department chairs were encouraging me to, frankly, get more work done, to get more research done, and it was. I felt that at that point, I'd done my 10 terms on the LNC. I will say, by the way, I was very flattered that many people would have been. I think they would have been happy had I continued on the LNC.
Yeah.
And I got an ego. I like it when people say nice things about me and my service, but I felt it was time for me to step off. I will also note, by the way, that for many years I've actually had sort of a question I've debated with myself. Would I actually have been more of a help to the liberty movement had I not been active in politics, had I been more involved with research, with scholarship than I turned out to be? I made the decision to be involved with the Libertarian Party. But I have to be scrupulously honest. I sometimes wonder, would I have been more effective ultimately in helping to build a freer, better society had I stayed out of politics, had I worked more in research, or had I worked more with respect to issue politics as opposed to partisan party politics.
A lot of people go there, but this was an issue where the Libertarian Party could have, I think, made such a difference. So, so we go from there, and then of course the Reno reset happens. I don't know if you have any. So you're off. So you really don't have anything else to comment about where the LP went after that, because you weren't.
Well, I do actually, and I think that I think frankly, I believe that the after Reno in 2022, I think that there were people who sought election to the LNC. They essentially said, "Look, we think we can do a better job." All right. Well, they were elected, and I don't think they've done a better job. I don't see the party moving forward. But I also think it's a little unfair for people to look at what those representing the Mises Caucus and to put all the blame essentially on the Mises Caucus. I think that we were in for stormy weather in this country if the Libertarian Party had had the best LNC possible, if we'd had the best presidential candidates in 2020 and 24 that we could possibly have mustered, we would still be having a lot of the problems. So I think that while some of the people with the Mises Caucus, I don't think they've done a particularly good job on the LNC or with the various state parties, I don't think it's fair to say, well, all the problems we're having, or nearly all the problems we're having, are associated with the Mises Caucus. I just don't think that's true.
Well,
I think we have problems regardless of what. If you'd handed me the magic wand and I'd waved it and I'd gotten what I thought was the best possible LNC.
Well, some people have quit the liberty movement because libertarians didn't take a harder stand against this coronavirus nonsense.
That's right.
That's sad. Right. That's very sad, but it's true. I mean, I think this was a huge opportunity that was completely missed. It could have been more for outreach, and the LP could have been leading the charge at the front, and instead the LP completely conceded that to people like Alex Jones. And then once they saw people like Alex Jones leading it, they said, well, I don't want to be a part of this because Alex Jones is here. And I don't, it really is I don't know what I just, I don't know. I don't know. There's so many what ifs here.
Right.
I do think, the fact that, but Jim, this was the other thing too, was, Jeff Neal said on 3 different occasions, said if we'd responded better to COVID, this Reno reset wouldn't have happened. And Ted Brown was the only person I heard make a case of Angela, a case against Angela based on, I don't think she has enough experience.
Well,
whereas all these other people were just saying, "Oh, they're a bunch of racists. That's why we can't vote for them."
Well, and
all of this backfired.
I thought that was very unfair. And again, when people ask me my opinion, and by the way, I try not to offer opinion unless it's actually requested. I don't know that people need my opinion. If they ask me for my opinion, I'm usually happy to share it. I had serious questions about the people who were seeking election to the LNC in 2022. These were people who, as far as I could tell, did not have much in the way of experience of dealing with the problems of a third party in the American system. There are many people who had been part of the Republican Party, and their experiences, to the extent they had experiences in partisan political activity, was in one of the legacy parties, usually the Republican Party. And many of them just didn't seem to appreciate the particular difficulties that we as a third party would have in terms of ballot access, in terms of the people who would make the laws being unfair to those who are not part of the conventional power structure. And I think they frankly, they had a fair degree of arrogance. They thought, okay, we're going to come in and we're going to show these libertarians, how it's done. And they found out that life's a lot harder than they had imagined. And I think in looking at pretty much any reasonable metric, the party has not been moving forward. And so those who sought, and I by the way, I don't question the motives of those with the caucus who sought positions of responsibility. I just don't think they, in some cases, they didn't really appreciate what the difficulties were, and they just haven't done a particularly good job. I don't see a lot of enthusiasm for the LP right now, and I do see there are many people who've been involved in the LP for many years who do not want to be associated with the Libertarian Party as currently constituted, and that's a shame. Some of these people are friends of mine.
Well, Jim, the other thing too was, and the analogy I like to use is, you're still ahead at the end of the third quarter of the game,
mm-hmm.
and a lot of the people in the lead just ended up quitting.
Mm-hmm.
And then some of these people said, "I oppose the Mises Caucus, so I quit." It's like, so. And if all these people had stuck around, maybe the Reno reset doesn't happen either. It's really, I do at least. I would like you to comment on. You weren't on the LNC, but what's your opinion of Joe Bishop Henchman and what happened with LP and H in 2021?
I have to say, I was very disappointed with that because I met Joe when Students for Liberty were formed in 2007. They really got cranked up in 2008, and then they had, when Students for Liberty really became an organization with an infrastructure, the Cato Institute helped them out, and there were quarterly meetings at the Cato Institute where Students for Liberty would basically welcome people from the libertarian community with the think tanks in DC. And Joe Bishop Henchman was working for the Tax Foundation at the time, so that's where I met him, and he was a very strong supporter of Students for Liberty, which I think is a very good organization. In the interest of full disclosure, I'm on the board of advisors for Students for Liberty, and I thought very highly of Joe. Joe served. We served together on the LNC. In fact, Bill Redpath, and I were on the Employee Policy and Compensation Committee. Joe's a very sharp guy. I considered him a friend. I was very happy when he was elected as chair in 2020, and I thought he was posed to do a great job for the Libertarian Party. And unfortunately, things just went off the rails. And I frankly was very surprised and very disappointed. I think he had the talent, the smarts to be an excellent chair, and things kind of blew up, and that was very disappointing to me.
Did you have do you have any opinions on the attempted coup in LP and H? I haven't really talked much about
I don't like coups.
Yeah.
I guess I'm very old-fashioned. Well, in fact, I know I'm very old-fashioned, and I think it's extremely important that libertarians ought to be particularly keen to follow the rules.
Yeah.
We talk about essentially matters of contract, honoring contract. We've got to follow the rules, and you can't. I realize that some people would say in positions when we're in extreme danger, that sometimes you don't want the rules to be sort of a suicide pact, but you have to follow the rules if you're going to have a party worthy of the name. You've got to abide by your rules. And unfortunately, from what I can tell, and by the way, again, this was very much the perspective of an outsider. I don't know all the details, but it looked to me as if there were people who they were willing to take shortcuts, and you just can't do that. So it was very unfortunate, very unfortunate.
Well, it seems like to me there were, I don't know how the one thing that I was always heard was that the Mises Caucus took over most of the positions, but they'll say, we'll let a non-Mises person have the position of chair just to give them some equal representation. And after that happened, the Mises Caucus just took the gloves off and said, we have to take every position now. We can't let our opponents have any position.
Well, one thing, by the way, I think it should be noted with what happened at the National Convention in 2020. From what I can tell, those with the caucus, they did the hard work of organizing, getting their people to the convention. And some of the complaints that I heard about, well, these Mises Caucus people are, they're taking over the party. Well, they did the hard work of organization, and
they did.
A lot of the complaints I heard would just struck me as just old-fashioned bitching. That those of us on this side, we got outworked, and we don't like that. So politics is hard work. If you want your perspective to be represented in terms of those who have responsibility for the organization of the party, be prepared to work hard. And from what I could tell, Mr. Heiss and his colleagues, they just work very hard to get people. Now, I've heard all sorts of stories that in some cases maybe they didn't follow the rules. I don't know whether that's true or not. I just don't know.
Jim, there's another issue I have to bring up here too, and this to me is I think a lot of the seeds were sown for this a while back, because you got involved with LP in the 80s. I was born in 1971, and I actually would have voted for Ron Paul in 1988 if I could have. But I knew about the Libertarian Party, and I learned about the Libertarian Party, and when I started getting involved with Libertarian parties, I was the kid. Mm-hmm. And even up in 2020, I still often feel like I'm the kid there. And then I go hang out with the Mises Caucus, and I'm the old man.
Yeah.
I mean, there is the LP. I hate the term Generation X, but the LP completely blew it with Generation X. I don't think they made any appeal to get Generation X into the party at all. And then suddenly the Mises Caucus goes out and appeals to this next generation of libertarians, mm-hmm. and whereas people from your generation and other people, you're eventually just going to die of attrition. There's an article I read years ago about the contrast between for-profit science fiction conventions and fan-run science fiction conventions. and it pointed out that fan-run science fiction conventions have a tendency to be, they keep re-electing the same people into positions of, the people with more experience get more experience, the people with none still never get any. And I think that's kind of what was happening with the LP here. And in some ways, if the arena reset doesn't happen, maybe there's not a new influx of people into the LP at all.
No, that very well may be correct.
I see there are so few people in the Mises Caucus that are near, or in the LP that are near my age. They're either, I feel like a lot of them are either 10 years older or 10 years younger. It's, or maybe I should say 8 years older, 8 years younger. I mean, and as I like to tell people, I'm the last of the libertarians who got most of his libertarian education from book catalogs. So it really, so I do think there, and I would bring it up, and they would just always say things like, well, all the young people are socialists. We don't need to bother with them. Yeah. And so that's how the party got old, Jim. It really was. It was getting old. And then, there really wasn't any way for the young people to get anything without, and I don't know how you managed to, I'd almost maybe say, maybe the LNC should literally have, age brackets by, I don't know how you keep an organization from getting old, and it happens with lots of them.
No, it's a very important question, and given that my niche in the liberty movement, in general, in the party in particular, was reaching out to college students, campus organizing. Frankly, we face a lot of very horrible selection bias issues in terms of reaching out to young people, and our efforts to try to promote libertarianism on college campuses. By the way, let me share with you something that many people, I think, in the Libertarian Party don't understand, and that is the vast majority of college students who are libertarians, frankly, are not interested in partisan party politics. To the extent they're interested in political activity at all, it tends to be issue politics.
Yeah.
The vast majority of campus libertarians are interested in the ideas, the philosophy. They're not really all that interested in the nuts and bolts of practical politics. And it's been much harder to organize libertarian party groups on college campuses than it is to organize general libertarian educational groups.
Well, I think educational groups are just as important anyway, Jim.
Why? Oh, yeah. Well, you're preaching to the choir there.
I don't. I mean, I don't. To those people, and that's, those people are part of the liberty movement.
Well, I agree. Well, and in fact, I've been personally criticized because I have emphasized building libertarian educational groups. I think we want to have both. My point is an observation that most of the young college students who are clearly libertarians, who are self-identified libertarians, by and large, are just not interested in.
They want to become professors or something like that, I guess. Or
well, that's not a bad thing. I'm
not saying it's a bad thing. Yeah, I'm not saying, I understand that completely. Yeah, I don't. There's and they write articles, and that's fine. That's, although and there, there's a where was I going to go with this? How did you get into libertarian politics, Jim? What was your
well, it was I actually was I was not a self-identified libertarian really until I was in my later 20s. Because I frankly I don't like politics. I mean, I did not look. I was not active.
Yeah, you don't have to like politics to be a libertarian, Jim. I mean,
no, I know. But in terms of being involved in party activities, I didn't get involved until there really wasn't a Libertarian Party presence in my neck of the woods So there really just wasn't an opportunity for me to be involved in party activity until I became a visiting scholar at the Earhart Foundation visiting fellow at the University of Rochester in New York. I was at the Center for Study of Government Policy and Business at the University of Rochester, which had, in Rochester, New York, there was a very active libertarian educational effort. And then they also had a very active party in Monroe County. And sort of by accident, I became involved with them and became involved both with the educational aspects and the party aspects. And so that's basically when I got involved, and then just sort of followed on. But I never felt that I really had a comparative advantage at politics. I thought that to the extent I had a comparative advantage, it was trying to explain and promote the ideas. But I also felt a sense of responsibility. There were a lot of good people out there fighting very hard to build a libertarian political presence. And to the extent that I could help out, I was willing to do so.
Was there a particular book you read or something like that, Jim? I mean, or somebody who influenced
Actually,
you?
it was actually the person to whom I give the well. I grew up. My mom and dad were, I chose my parents wisely. I wanted the best, and that's what I got. My parents were sort of natural libertarians. They were not political people, but they had sort of the general libertarian framework. And when I went off to college, I was sort of this hotshot mathematician.
Yes.
I do remember, though, one interesting crystallizing moment. In summer of '76, a friend of mine and I we were attending classes at Virginia Tech, and my friend just happened to bring up the Humphrey Hawkins full employment bill, which Augustus Hawkins and Hubert Humphrey were promoting a bill on Capitol Hill to promote full employment. And when my friend Phil was discussing this, I, in frankly a rather dim-witted fashion, said, well, full employment, that sounds like a good idea. Literally that day, when I returned to my home, the family copy of Newsweek magazine was lying around. And this was in the days where Milton Friedman would have columns in Newsweek and Paul Samuelson would have columns. So it turned out that in this particular copy, Milton Friedman was addressing the Humphrey Hawkins full employment bill. And I read Professor Friedman's argument, in which he completely shredded any sort of justification for this bill. And my feeling was one of complete embarrassment, because Professor Friedman, who understood, by the way, Professor Friedman understood the importance of rhetoric properly defined.
Yes.
He understood the importance of how do you structure an argument so that the argument flows in its most natural and powerful fashion. So when I read his article completely destroying the justification, I was frankly rather embarrassed, because I at the time flattered myself as a reasonably bright boy, and I didn't think this up. And I figured, after reading his article, if I want to think of myself as a moderately educated fellow, I need to start thinking about matters of economics. And so it was not so much I ever changed my way of thinking. I just started thinking about these issues, and slowly but surely, I came across the Freeman, which was a publication of the Foundation for Economic Education, and actually went to a summer session in Irvington-on-Hudson, when Fee was still at Irvington-on-Hudson, and met a lot of great people, both faculty and fellow participants in the seminar. And I just began thinking along lines. I also had the opportunity to serve as a visiting scholar or visiting fellow with the Center for Study of Public Choice at Virginia Tech, my alma mater, where Jim Buchanan and Gordon Tullock were there. Of course, Buchanan ultimately won his Nobel Prize in economics in 1986. Gordon Tullock, in my opinion, should have shared the Nobel Prize.
Oh, yeah.
And so I was hobnobbing with some very, very, very sharp people after my service as a visiting scholar, visiting schmuck at the Public Choice Center. I had the honor of serving as the Earhart Foundation visiting fellow at the Center for Research and Government Policy at the University of Rochester, where, again, I was surrounded by very, very, very sharp people. from whom I learned a great deal about matters of economics, finance, accounting. And so just the more I began to think about these issues, the more I realized that I fit into the category of libertarian. And I identified myself as a libertarian and actually became involved in activities of explaining and promoting these ideas.
So James Buchanan, the Nobel laureate, and Tullock, that's Tullock for people who might want to look that up. Gordon Tullock. I thought it was Tullock, but I think you might be the first person I've heard who came to libertarianism via Milton Friedman, which is great. But Milton Friedman was that rare economist who can go into a room full of PhDs and talk to the PhDs, but then he can go out on the street and talk to those people as well. Thank you. There are very few economists who are able to do that.
Indeed, Milton Friedman's program, Free to Choose.
Yeah,
I watched that in the winter and spring of 1980 and was exposed to people such as Tom Sowell and Walter Williams. And I have enormous respect for Tom Sowell and the late Walter Williams. And so Professor Friedman was very, very helpful in helping, as was, by the way, Gordon Tullock. Professor Tullock was very gracious with his time. I got to know him a lot better than Jim Buchanan because I thought Tullock was doing a lot of interesting work concerning so-called demand revealing processes. He and a fellow named Nick Tiedemann were working this. In fact, that's one of the reasons why Gordon Tullock was interested in my serving as a visiting scholar at the Center for Study of Public Choice, was because I was a pretty good mathematician, and that was not an area where he was strong, and he thought I might be able to come in and help him with some work that was mathematically inclined.
Yeah, Tullock died in 2014.
Fascinating character. Everybody in economics, I think, has a Gordon Tullock story. I'll share mine. I had a discussion with him about matters of Austrian economics, and he called me woolly-headed. And I found out subsequently that evidently he liked me a lot, because if he didn't like me, he would have used a much pithier term than woolly-headed. So I just thought that was rather nice.
And James Buchanan died in 2013, so some of these people are still gone. Yeah, Jim, I got to ask, as somebody whose first real libertarian event was a fee seminar in July of 1994, and that wonderful building, that wonderful mansion.
Yep.
Who was on the faculty there in the 70s? I can only imagine that had to be an amazing.
Well, I actually met Leonard Reed. I was there.
Leonard Reed would have still been there.
He passed away not long after that.
I think 83 or 84 is when Leonard Reed died.
He passed away not long after that. But Robert Anderson was there. Hans Senholz was there.
Leonard Reed died in 83.
Bettina Bien was there.
She was just Bettina Bien then, because later she was Bettina Bien Graves. But yeah. She was still on staff there in 94. I'm so glad I get to meet some of these great people.
And it was not just the people.
Kerzner was there, right?
Pardon?
Kerzner?
No, Israel was not there at that time.
Oh, he was not there.
But he was.
I thought he was always at NYU. Yeah.
But he was. I did hear him at a subsequent fee event.
Yeah.
But he was not there in June of 1982.
Well, he was at NYU for a long time, so going up to Irvington was no big deal for him. I mean, he was there. He was there at my seminar. Hans Senholz.
Professor Senholz was there. Very, very nice man. Very gracious man. John Williams, an Australian minister, who he told the story about the Good Samaritan versus the Better Samaritan. Fine fellow. It was a great group of people, as were the attendees.
Yeah.
I met a lot of really nice people, interesting people, bright people, and so it was a very enjoyable experience.
Usually about 20 or 30 people, something like that.
Yes.
Was Edmund Opitz still there? Or?
Ed Opitz was. Yes, he was.
Really great guy. Yeah.
Ed Opitz was there. Yes, I met him.
Senholz. Let's see who else. Was John Chamberlain there?
No, not for that particular event.
There was still a lot of old school fee people back then. Right. I mean, I often say I got involved at a good time, but the time I got really first jumped in, Hayek died, I think, in 92, and Mrs. von Mises died. Hazlitt died. Karl Hess died. There were quite a few people who died between 92 and 94, and I missed.
Well, in fact, Karl Hess passed away. He was at the University of Virginia Hospital when he passed away. Karl and I became good friends. In fact, the first speaker when I founded Students for Individual Liberty at UVA, Karl Hess was the first speaker for us, and he gave an excellent presentation. Yeah. He was just a big, sweet teddy bear of a man, and just he and I became pretty good friends.
And he was living in the far eastern panhandle of West Virginia at the time. So
West Virginia.
It would have been hard to bring him there. As I probably should be more positive.
In fact, Bill Redpath was the one. Yes. Bill Redpath drove him from Carneysville down to Charlottesville to speak at UVA. This was in September of 1987.
Yeah, and as cheap as Bill Bradford was, the founder and publisher of Liberty Magazine, after Karl died, he still let Therese have a subscription.
That was nice.
Yeah,
no, Therese,
Karl Hess's wife.
Therese,
and believe me, Bill didn't give anything. God, he was so cheap too. I shouldn't talk about it, but man, it's like Bill. I was like, oh, but anyway, Karl Hess, I think, was a good ambassador. And
Karl Hess was
trader for Goldwater. So
he was an excellent representative, because Karl pointed out the importance of being a good neighbor, and about how you can advance liberty ideas by being a good neighbor. And he was a real sweetheart of a guy. And the liberty movement lost, in my opinion, a great man when he passed away.
We did really. Was there anybody else at FEE? And when you went there, did you only go to FEE once? I got it.
I went there. I went there in June of 1982, and then they had a couple of briefer seminars in April of 1984.
Yeah, they usually have like a Saturday night. I actually when I was living in Austin, I actually flew for the last event at the mansion just to go up there and say goodbye to that wonderful building. It's just it's and at the time it was perfect for it, but you don't need a mansion like that anymore, unfortunately. But Jim, if I could give all these younger libertarians just a time machine trip and just here, go back and experience a seminar at FEE.
It was great.
You'll love it. It
was great.
It's like you're part of a family for one whole big week. It was just, and that was the first time, I've told my parents, I came back saying that was the best week of my life. It really just, and, I remember also there were a couple Argentines there and some Brazilians there. And of course, being where it was, all you had to do, you fly into JFK, you take a shuttle bus over to Grand Central, then you get on the train, you take the train up, you get off at Irvington, then you walk up that hill about a half mile, but then you're at the mansion. It wasn't hard to bring in people internationally at all to that seminar. That was a great little building, and that beautiful library. I read Anthem in that library, Anthem by Ayn Rand. I remember, I don't know if who else was there. It was still mostly an older crowd too when I was there, because Senholz, who was president of feedback? Oh, Reed would have still been president back then. Yeah.
Well, when I was there, it was President Reed, but although I think Robert Anderson did a lot of the administration.
Yeah, Robert Anderson. There were a few other people.
Here we are tripping down memory lane.
Yeah, I just love talking about those people. I don't know.
Well, they did, and by the way, there's a fascinating story.
Yeah.
That has not really been well told about the extent to which people such as Leonard Reed had to deal with truly dreadful Congress people who went after anybody who was who had criticism of the New Deal. There was before the Red Scare, there was the Brown Scare, and there's several people who've done research in this area about how people who were, very prominent and very vocal critics of the New Deal, what they had to put up with in terms of congressional investigations and the like, and how people such as Leonard Reed, who was certainly prominent and vocal about the problem, the trials and tribulations up with which they had to put because they took a stand against sort of an American fascism. And
yeah, one person I know who also gets brought up a lot was John T. Flynn. They
yes,
really
as
harassed
we
him.
go, yes.
I never looked in. I've never heard much about that, but it doesn't shock me much. I mean, it was really a very dark time. It's
Well, we Americans would benefit from really good courses in history.
and this is something I never heard of. You know what you call the Brown Scare? But I imagine Leonard Reed had some stories. I don't know if there'd have been maybe.
Well, it's actually an interesting tidbit. It's actually been suggested that a lot of people who came from more of a conservative or libertarian perspective perhaps were not as prominent in fighting against the Red Scare was because they had gotten the poop end of the stick during the Brown Scare, and that many of the folks who were hauled before HUAC, or at least who had to deal with problems because of the House Un-American Activities Committee, that they were getting their just desserts from what had happened, in the 1930s and 1940s. So it's just an interesting part of American history that is not really very well known.
I'm curious to know how they would have dealt with Isabel Patterson or Rose Wilder Lane too. Those are some other, but they didn't get that famous Still 43, but they were still writing columns and stuff like that. One thing I've heard is that FDR had the radio, but he didn't have the newspapers.
Well, there was a lot of opposition to the New Deal, and again, I think it was T.S. Eliot referred to as the provincialism of time. If you in today's intellectual and cultural milieu, there really isn't a lot of recognition of the extent to which there was considerable pushback on the New Deal. In fact, Professor David Beto, I think he's now retired from the University of Alabama, wrote about the tax rebellions, the local tax rebellions that took place during essentially the Great Depression.
I've had David on a couple times. Yeah, he's a good guy.
He is. He's a good guy, and he's done what I think is very important scholarship. And so I just wish his work were more widely known, or perhaps more widely recognized.
Jim, I should ask too. Did you ever cross paths with Rothbard?
With whom?
Murray Rothbard.
Sure. No, in fact, the first Mises Summer Seminar was held in 1987 at Stanford University, and Murray Rothbard was there. In fact, a little bit of a little tidbit. Murray's brother-in-law, Carl Schumacher, was in charge of X-High Graphics, a printing company over in Elkton, Virginia, which is about a 45-minute drive from where I live. And Mr. Schumacher was the printer of Virginia Liberty, the Libertarian Party of Virginia newsletter. So I got to, but anyway, with respect to Murray Rothbard, I got to know him in both 1987 at Stanford, and then the subsequent year, another Mises Summer Seminar in '88. Murray Rothbard and I both shared an interest in basketball and Broadway shows. He came out of the New York of the 1950s, where basketball was something that a lot of young men in New York enjoyed. And I played basketball and loved basketball, and we would talk basketball, and we would talk about Broadway show tunes. He was utterly charming. My association with I know there are other people for whom utterly charming is not the phrase they would apply to Murray Rothbard.
I know Peter Boettke's also a big basketball fan. Yeah.
Well, yeah. In fact, I think if I remember correctly, I met Pete Boettke at a fee event. I think he was a student at the time.
Because there was also it doesn't get talked much about because they just kind of leave each other alone. But there was this unfortunate split between what I call the Auburn Austrians and the NYU Austrians, and the NYU Austrians would be Peter Boettke, Mario Rizzo, Israel Kirzner, and then the Auburn Austrians would be Rothbard, Murray Rothbard, and basically anybody who follows Rothbard, really.
Well, in any vibrant intellectual movement, you're going to have splits, if you will. If people are actually pursuing important issues, sometimes you're going to see this sort of thing. And I actually, in some ways, I see that as a mark of vibrancy. But it's sometimes these discussions might be.
But there's a lot of there's civility there. It's not really attack. They're not really viciously.
That's right.
Their academia seems to demand you be intellectual rigor, which and maybe just realizing that we have bigger enemies to fight. Matt Erickson has blocked me on Twitter, and although I'd kind of like to get him on the show just because he often has some great one-liners, and he once said, Jim. And I don't remember his exact words. I'm kind of paraphrasing here, but he said, if arguing with people like Nick Sarwark and Archie Flower is your strategy for liberty, you need to find something better to do. And
that's an interesting way of putting it.
And I think, Jim, that's one thing I do think in a lot of ways, that's part of what maybe is, fueling the crypto movement. Bitcoiners finally said, we can't fix things by votes, but we'll create this thing called Bitcoin and literally just completely circumvent the whole system. Although I think Bitcoin is being hijacked now, but there are people out there who are going out and building alternative systems, and I think is sometimes it is an effective way to fight liberty. I mean, where would there have been an enlightenment without the printing press? I mean, it's
right.
And creating other social media movements and
my let 1,000 flowers bloom. I mean, I try not to criticize other if there are other libertarians who have different ways of trying to promote the movement, as long as I think they're not screwing things up, I try not to get in their way, because my crystal ball broke a long time ago. I don't know what the best course of action is.
I think there's a lot of different, as long as you're not working against other people or doing something that's just really bad PR. I mean, I do get very upset when people talk about creating another free state project. It's like, you can only have one, Jim, since you've done so much college activism, and I should have put this at the beginning, but I'll bring it up now. We're about 2 weeks removed, from the shooting of Mr. Charlie Kirk, which is, quite unfortunate. I had my disagreements with him, but I certainly saw where he was valuable. Do you think he was being effective? And I'm amazed. I mean, this is the reaction to this is something like the reaction to Kobe Bryant or even Diana. I'm amazed at how many people are expressing emotion.
Well,
I didn't realize he'd impacted that many people.
Well, I don't know to what extent a lot of this praise is actually genuine.
Well, did he ever come to UVA though?
No. Well, I can't say. Let me retract that. I don't know. I don't remember his being here, but it's quite possible that he. I mean, a lot of things happen at the University of Virginia that I don't necessarily know about. Yes. I know that there were efforts to promote his organization here, but I don't know that they really gained a lot of currency. I don't know to what extent some of the various encomia that are being heaped upon him are really genuine. I think that there are people on the conservative side of things who want to use his death as an opportunity to hit people over the head. Many of the opinions that Mr. Kirk evidently expressed, I would not agree with.
Yeah.
But he did evidently gain a reputation. I don't know if it's actually deserved, of somebody who was trying to actually promote discussion and debate.
Yes.
So, and that would be to his credit if that is indeed the case. The reaction, interestingly enough, at the University of Virginia, there's an old joke about UVA, the University of Virginia, being a hotbed of rest. I think by and large the reaction at the university was more just sort of sheer shock. UVA is an interesting place in that there are plenty of people who disagree with my perspective, the perspective of Students for Individual Liberty. But by and large, people who strongly disagree with libertarians, by and large, just they leave us alone. They're not going to come up and spit at us. They're not going to go out of their way to call us nasty names. They just leave us alone. And so, to the extent that there are activities that, again, people who don't agree with libertarians, they tend not to be, the sort of ugly things, the sort of ugly protests that you see at other schools, which has actually been very nice. It means that those of us of libertarian disposition, to the extent that we encounter opposition, it tends not to be really ugly. And I think there were plenty of people who did not mourn Mr. Kirk's death, but they also were not. They realized that when you start assassinating people, that's a game that's you really don't want to play that game. So.
Yeah. Well, in the same way, I don't mourn the death of people I don't know about. I don't mourn the death of people I don't know. I mean, we just kind of ignore it when a lot of people, because people are dying all the time. We just kind of ignore it because there's millions of people in this world. But there was I'm glad there wasn't this whole, there wasn't this celebration. I think that was kind of revealing. I think it's probably doing the left more harm than good, but there's now, just recently Matt Walsh treated, leftist terrorism as a national emergency. And I'm like, I just said, I cringe every time I hear the words national emergency now. It's now maybe you're just using those words innocently, but there's always these buzzwords that people use.
Right. Well,
talking about blood and soil, though, now people are now bringing up this whole thing called the friend-enemy distinction. And this is actually the friend-enemy distinction is a concept that's existed for thousands of years. It's not something that just started with the Nazis. So it's getting, I don't know. I don't know what kind of impact Charlie, but I'm here. A lot of people I at least have had in contact with have said things about Charlie, and that's been impactful for me. I mean, Jennifer Grossman of the Atlas Society came out and said a lot of nice things about him. And
yeah, well, I actually never met the gentleman, so I was certainly very very surprised, and I was horrified that somebody's up there speaking, because it's quite possible I could have been in a situation like that, because I've given plenty of lectures on college campuses, although usually not out in the open. I mean, usually they're in buildings.
I think there's going to be a reluctance to having events out in open places like this, where you can. It's so easy, to get on top of a building, and it's rather strange. Jim. One thing I can say for the American Liberty Movement now, and part of the reason why I've talked about him so much on here is we do actually have a model for success now. It's not in America, but what Javier Milei is doing is nothing short of remarkable. And he's going out and changing people's minds. He's got 70% approval with Argentines under 30. And, I'm looking at our movement now. I'm just thinking, how can we copy that? What do you think about Milei? I mean, Liberty Internationals, you saw him speak in Buenos Aires like I did,
Well, he's an interesting character, and sometimes somebody who is frankly not cut from. I mean, Javier Milei is not cut from the usual mold of somebody who becomes a major political star. I actually was surprised to see his emergence. I did not anticipate that we would see someone who articulates our libertarian ideas, who is sort of proudly wearing a libertarian label, who would be elected as president of Argentina. That's not something that I would have.
Yeah, that's the shocking thing. He got people to vote for him. I mean,
Well, it could be that things just got so bad in Argentina. People had the inflation was terrible, that they had seen essentially Peronist policies for, at least those people old enough, had seen Peronist policies for a long time. It had not moved Argentina forward. And inflation, by the way, I as an aside, I look at inflation as civilization killers. High rates of inflation make it very difficult to do any sort of economic calculation. It penalizes the prudent in particular, because people who've they've set aside for their old age, they've tried to do things the right way. High rates of inflation really hit those people hard, and apparently the people just got sufficiently sick and tired of what they were being offered, that when May stepped forward, he offered them a vision that was, it was something that people were willing to try. I hope he's successful, because I think that the repercussions in places such as Brazil, in other parts of South America, Chile perhaps, will be very, very important. It's not just Argentina. It's what kind of implications does his success have for other very large countries in South America?
The things I've noticed, Jim, the first lesson from all this is get rid of the porcupine and replace it with a lion. And the guy was the lead singer of a Rolling Stone cover band. He knows how to read a room, play with a crowd. There are so many skills there that this guy has, and I think we need libertarians with skills like that. I mean, I politely, a few weeks before the convention, I politely told Michael Rechtenwald, "You use too many big words," and he didn't seem to understand why that was a problem. And there are ways. Millet is a showman, but he's also an intellectual and an economist, and he really knows how to get people to follow him. And we don't have a lot of people like that, and we need to figure out ways to get people like that into our movement. I sometimes wonder if the Nolan chart helps. I think the Nolan chart doesn't really help us. I think it makes us look really nerdy. It's a very nerdy thing, but that's a sacred cow that can't be touched for whatever.
Well, let me, if I may, since I had the honor of serving as chairman of the board of directors of the Advocates, let me make a point clear that I'm not sure is widely understood. The point of the world's smallest political quiz was actually to serve as a discriminator, to help people get an idea of essentially to try to give people an idea of where they stood in terms of these political philosophies. It was not meant, in my opinion, as a way to help people become libertarian. It was supposed to help people understand where they stood, and perhaps to introduce the word libertarian to them. The questions on the quiz, I know that there were people who criticized the quiz because they say, well, the questions are designed to make you look like a libertarian when you're not. And that is decidedly not what the questions were meant to do. The questions the purpose of the quiz was to try to give people an idea of where they really fit on this two-dimensional grid. It was therefore, the purpose was to be a good discriminator. And the questions were designed to be as accurate as possible in trying to help people see where they fit into those different quadrants. So you're right, by the way, that if you looked at the quiz from what I would consider to be the wrong direction, the quiz it's not useful.
I don't think it's useful. I don't think it's really useful at all. It's fair enough. When our
fair enough.
I mean, when you're trying to persuade people, it just seems so nerdy, and if you're trying to use it for persuasion, I can see your criticism. Well, that's what we're doing when we have these outreach booths at events and stuff. I had her on a while back too. I had a short while back, I had Susanna Hupp on, who was in the Luby's massacre, that great gun activist.
Right.
And I remember thinking after, I said to her, I think you really did make a difference. Mm-hmm. And granted, only one issue, but we look at how that's one area where concealed carry and stuff like that. I think I don't know if the LP had much to do with that, but certainly the gun rights movement has been one liberty movement that has definitely been achieving more victories than losses. And I think
yes,
kept our country from going crazy. You were involved with the International Alliance for Libertarian Parties for a while too, right? What are
I was the representative. I was the LNC's representative to IALP.
What are some other areas we should be paying attention to right now, in your opinion? We obviously pay attention to Argentina. Is there any place else, or?
Well, in terms of what's going on, I mean, I think that there are certainly a lot of things going on. For the most part, there are some good things going on.
Yeah.
Sort of a general liberalization on a lot of issues, but there's an awful lot of bad stuff going on, and will be. I actually
Yeah.
see what's going on in the European Union as an enormous amount of pressure building up. It'll be very interesting to see to what extent the European Union actually stays a union, because of course, you had Brexit. You have a lot of sentiment in other parts, particularly Eastern Europe, that the European Union is not actually a force for good. And so I'm keeping my eye on what happens, because the regulatory apparatus that we see in Europe now, including intellectual issues, I'm hoping that many people in Europe are going to say, "Wait a minute, this superstructure that we've instituted is actually not really helping us. It's not really moving us in a better direction." So
I don't think the European Union ever really had much popular support anyway. I mean,
well, that's yes, but
they
yeah,
would keep these initiatives down, and they'd get voted. They'd keep putting them out there until they finally got approved. But it would take. It's. I think it's probably the silliest government in the history of the world. And it's amazing. I mean, our Constitution went from 1789 to now to get ridiculous, but the EU got more ridiculous in a lot less time. I mean, I think Western Europe is largely finished. I don't really see any the people who were somewhat inoculated against communism because they had it shoved down their throats, at least Poland, they seem to know what they're doing, but they've got but they do have the misfortune of being closer to Russia. It's just, I don't know where we go. It's and there's other things too going on, like declining birth rates and just
well, that is certainly an issue.
Yeah.
I'm very disappointed at what's going on in a lot of the English-speaking world, looking at Canada, Australia, with respect to issues of what we'll euphemistically refer to as free speech. Australia and Canada in particular are moving in very much the wrong direction, I would say, in terms of a truly liberal perspective on freedom of speech. Of course, in the United States, we've seen some major movement in the wrong direction. So we live in interesting times.
And we have this case too, where the government is sort of contracting out its censorship.
Yes. No, that's a very important observation.
If the government is hiring, somebody, hiring, Baldwin Felts to do that's an old organization, but hiring Baldwin Felts to, go out and beat up African American kids in the hood. I mean, that's still the government doing it, even though somebody said, "Well, it's a private company; they can do whatever they want." I said, "No, but they're agents of the
right."
And it's making. And there's the other thing too, is sometimes the EU might be making Google agents to censor Americans because and big tech, the corruption of big tech really started. I remember when Google went into China, and John Rowland, who is no longer alive, but had that website constitution.org. And he talked about how people are having trouble finding my website after Google went into China. And it's like, it was getting less attention in the search because, and John was harmless. Yeah. But I think people are finally, the toughest thing, Jim, is you have to always keep your eye on what you're for and not get too focused on what you're against.
No, that's
a struggle for every political activist.
No, you're absolutely right.
Yeah. Well, I think we covered just about everything here, Jim. I knew this would be a good talk, and I'm glad I blocked out the time.
Well, thank you. I'm flattered that you thought that I might be worth listening to.
And you might very well have given me the longest recording that I don't think I'm going to have to edit at all. So thank you very much for that. If I don't have to edit,
thank you for asking good questions and making important observations.
I'll see, but yeah, it's we might get back and talk about academia or something like that. Or
well,
I wanted to talk about the overall liberty movement.
And that's fine. There are plenty of. I think that most people who are not associated with what you might call higher ed don't realize what many of the big problems are. And one thing that bothers me greatly, I call myself a mathematician,
Yes.
and I think that's reasonable. But I also, my doctorate is actually in something called systems engineering, and I like to flatter myself with conceit that I'm a pretty good systems engineer. And it's a source of great frustration to me that when we talk about education and education policy, we really don't get down to fundamentals. We don't talk about goals. What does it mean to be educated? What do we want from education? We carry on these disputes without actually getting to fundamentals. And as a professor of systems engineering, that bothers me. You can't, if you're not asking the right questions, I'm not sure that any of the answers are going to be very useful. So, one of these days, when you've got nothing better to do, if you want to get my perspective on education as a general matter and higher education,
yes,
I'm always willing to open my big yap and and offer my comments. Some of the comments might even be useful.
Yeah, that's one area. I've always said that's Jordan Peterson's greatest strength is he asks really great questions, and he doesn't. And he really, which is why you can be thought provoking in that sense. Well, it's certainly good to. Where you got a website, Jim, or not?
I don't. I don't have a personal website. I don't know that my observations are necessarily worthy of other people's attention.
I don't know where we can find you out there, but you certainly got a history behind you. This has been a great show.
Well, thank you. Thank you for allowing me to participate.
I think this is an important conversation. Hopefully we can find some healing going forward. I really, the party, I don't know if the party can, if we do the right, as long as we don't shoot ourselves in the foot, I think the party can come back here. But
I have this, I will point out, I tend to be a naturally optimistic person. Maybe it's just because I've been horse manure lucky all throughout my life. But I have this notion that societies based on liberty and responsibility are by any reasonable standard better societies. And I think if we have the opportunity to present an honest case for a truly libertarian society, realizing that it will not be a perfect society, if we have the opportunity to help people see how they make valid comparisons, that they're not comparing apples to oranges or apples to rocks, I think that ultimately a society of liberty and responsibility will be the preferential option. Now, eventually it can be a very long time from now, but I guess you could say I have confidence in the validity of our ideas. And I feel that if we explain our ideas well, at the very least, we will find that most people will actually find a significant part of our ideas are worthy of their support. And if we get to the point where if we can whittle away a very large amount of the areas where we take care of where we already do agree, then the remaining part of the battle, I think we have a pretty good chance of winning that battle. So now, contrary to rumor, I've been wrong before. So always keep in mind that maybe my predictions are not.
I don't know. I think we're reaching a point where academia might just collapse, and that might give us hope. I don't know if there's, but anyway, please like this video, like the show, subscribe to the channel, check out my Substack, go buy my novel, Escape from the Village. People are giving me money to buy me a coffee. Thank you, Jim Lark. I'm Chris Baker. We're out. Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you.